Hi everyone and welcome. We're down here in my wormery and I'm getting ready to feed, and today it's going to be night crawlers. The focus of today's feeding is going to be my VermiBags, which are night crawlers. Over here in the VermiBag tote there's African night crawlers, and down there in the VermiBag mini is the European night crawlers. And the types of food that we're going to be feeding with today can be seen here in this bucket. We've got mostly banana peels and lettuce, and one of my staple food items that I normally feed with is the spent coffee grounds. And if you've been watching my channel, you'll know that I've got night crawlers elsewhere, and those night crawlers are outside. Those night crawlers are in my outdoor worm bin, or it might be more accurate for me to say that it was outside. If you've been watching my channel, you know that I've been flip-flopping, going in and out, getting cold feet about leaving my worm bin outside every time there's a cold snap on its way. And somewhere between today, which is Thursday, and I think Saturday, so over the next 3 days, it's supposed to be very cold. I believe tomorrow, maybe not even going over freezing, and in the night time going down into the teens, maybe even single digits. So I lost my nerve, and I just felt it was safest to put the worms indoors again, like I've been doing occasionally. So those night crawlers outside, the European night crawlers, which cohabitate with red wigglers in my outdoor worm bin, are not the focus of today's feeding. Today's feeding, we're just dealing with the internal bins, my night crawlers in the VermiBags. So let's take a look at how they're doing. We're going to throw some food in there, check out how they're coming along, and I think we'll start with the European night crawlers. So we're just going to remove the covering here. You might notice that the paper is damp, and there's even a worm hanging out right here on top of the paper. Come on, European night crawler, get off the paper. I want to remove it. And the reason it's damp is because I've been taking active measures to keep the material in these bins nice and moist. I've been coming down here maybe every day, every other day, to spray water into the bin and onto the paper on top to keep things nice and damp and comfortable for the worms. So if you've been following along, the one thing we've been noticing lately is that the material in these VermiBags has been a bit dry, and the concern was that it might start to become a bit uncomfortable for the worms. So as I feel around, especially on the edges where there's a fair amount of ventilation because of the fabric material that this container is made of, it's just been a bit more dry than I would like, and it seems like the spraying down of the material that I've been doing with just water has been working quite nicely. So what's the deal with this worm? It's just not moving. Oh, now it's starting to move. Just kind of chilling out. So now that things are nice and damp in here, it's starting to feel a little bit more like a typical worm bin. Maybe even a little bit more damp than it needs to be, but I think that's maybe beneficial to the worms. I think they would prefer it that way as opposed to the other way, which is too dry. What do we got here? I'm starting to see some of the scraps from the previous feedings. These look like banana stems, and obviously this ear of corn that was placed in here. The corn has been in here for some time now, a few weeks. It was funny, during the first week of it being in here, it had actually started sprouting. A lot of the kernels had started sprouting. Little tiny plants that started growing, and you know, people started wondering, oh my goodness, you cooked that corn? I've never seen cooked corn sprout like that. Well, no, I hadn't cooked it. I had just taken it right from the refrigerator where it kind of got lost in the back of the crisper drawer and forgotten about. So so it had never been cooked. So I think I like what I'm seeing here. You know, this container is full of European nightcrawlers that were hatched a little bit over 200 days ago, maybe around 203, 205 days ago. So, you know, European nightcrawler, an adult one, would look something like this, I would say, you know, in size. But I guess what I was drawn to, my attention was drawn to, is these little tiny worms hanging out down here. So I've been kind of wondering, you know, hey, when can I start to expect to see reproduction happening in my nightcrawler bins? And I believe that I'm finally starting to see some signs of it here. The yeah, that last handful appeared to have a number of very, very tiny little worms in it, which is kind of what I've been on the lookout for. So that's a good sign in terms of seeing, you know, what appears to be signs of reproduction. Some baby worms starting to appear. Now the spraying efforts that I've been taking have not been able to reach down this far, it would seem. Because as I get down to the lower reaches of this bag, I can certainly hear that the material down at the very bottom is very dry and crumbly. And once again, if you've been following along with my updates, then you'll know that I was interested in trying to make sure that everything at the very bottom of this bin is compost only. Because since this is a continuous flow-through style system, the harvesting of the material occurs by opening a hatch at the very bottom and dropping out what has collected at the bottom. So I was really interested in not having a bunch of uncomposted material drop out when it comes time to harvest this. So I've been trying to, you know, reach down to the very bottom to excavate uncomposted stuff like this piece of cardboard and wads of paper that I had pulled out in the past. I don't feel like I'm reaching any large wads of uncomposted paper down below. Most of the stuff I'm pulling out seems to be pretty nicely composted material, which is pretty promising. It's kind of nice to also be finding worms down there to suggest that I'm, you know, hopefully going to end up with fully composted material at the bottom, because they're still hanging out down there a little bit, working on the stuff. But since it is so dry down there, I was just worried that, you know, it would totally repel any worms from wanting to go down there to finish the job. So, I'm just contemplating what I could possibly do to try to boost the moisture levels down at the very bottom. You could probably hear it as I scrape around here. The materials are rather dry, and you can hear them as they get pushed up against the edge of the bag, and I'm moving it around. So this bag doesn't have that much material in it quite yet. It's not that heavily populated, so it's not been breaking down very quickly. But I definitely like the look of the material as far as, you know, appearance goes. It's just it's moisture that I'm not entirely thrilled about. So maybe just by kind of, you know, moving things around this way, maybe I'm going to help get some of the more moist material down into there, and you know, maybe that'll help things. So let's just see if I could take some of this more moist compost that's out here on the edges, and if I can move that down in there. Well, you know, that's not a good idea, because I could see a lot of bedding material in this as well. I'm starting to feel like I'm running myself into a dead-end street here, like I don't know what to do next. Can you tell? A little bit of a learning curve here, I guess, for me too, so that's fair. Never had a continuous flow-through bin before, so it's kind of uncharted territory for me. So, you know, some people might be saying, you know, dude, you're wasting your time. What are you doing here? I do this sometimes, you know, I kind of do waste time a little bit sometimes. It's not to not to prolong the inevitable. Sometimes I'm kind of just thinking on my feet here, trying to figure out how I can optimize a certain situation. And in this condition here, the situation I'm interested in optimizing is making sure that I've got just finished compost down below, so that when it does come time to harvest this material, I get castings only, not all kinds of debris and whatnot mixed into the castings. So what I tried to jostle loose from the sides is somewhat more damp material, ideally compost only, although you can see there's like some stems of leaves and stuff falling down as well. So I'm thinking that the stuff that's at the very bottom is hopefully a little bit more you know, a concentration of compost only at this point, as opposed to all kinds of other stuff like what I've been fishing out of the bottom. So I think there's going to be opportunities to try to do this again in the future, and maybe at a future time I'll be able to maybe throw an ice cube or two down in there to see if I could help boost the moisture as well. So my hope is that hopefully we can get some worms to continue working that material down, and try to keep the level of the moisture a little bit more consistent throughout the entire bin here. So now I'm going to just sort of level things off here a little bit. Now that we really pulled all the really dry stuff up to the top, and that really dry stuff will eventually get another treatment of me spraying water into here to help things keep hydrated. But for now I just want to sort of proceed with the business of getting this feeding completed in this bin. So let me go ahead and make a little pit down here once again where we can drop in some food items for these little guys. But before we do that, I'm going to lay in some of this partially eaten large chunks of food that we fished out as we were poking around, because the stuff that's going in fresh is frozen. I'd rather have it resting on top of some of these older food items than on top of the worms. Okay, so in goes some lettuce. As well as some banana peel. My hope is that the food has a fair amount of moisture content to it, so as it thaws out, hopefully it's going to kick off some moisture and help also hydrate the material surrounding it. So now another thing we're going to add today is some grit. I'm doing my best to try to be a little bit more generous when it comes to the application of grit. In my case, the grit is pulverized eggshells to help the worms with their digestion. And I guess on top we're going to use coffee grounds, and I got a fair amount of it since I'm only feeding 2 bins today. So I'll go ahead and I'll dump in about half of what's in this container. That seems like it's doing a pretty good job, almost entirely covering the food here. Good. And that stuff's not frozen either, so at this point, if there's worms in the material that I'm moving over the top now, then there's not as much concern about you know, sticking them in close proximity of frozen materials. Alright, so that's kind of where we stand with my European night crawlers. Again, I'm just, you know, kind of learning the ropes here when it comes to dealing with bag systems, which are new to me here, as well as flow-through systems. So it's my first experience using both. So I'm definitely kind of training wheel situation here still. But I like how the material level continues to rise. I'm almost at this seam here. But luckily I'm still not so deep that I can still continue to poke down deep and try to try to keep tabs on how that lower section is coming along, just so we don't end up with all kinds of weird uncomposted stuff down in there. When it comes time to harvest this, I'd like to know for sure that I've got compost only coming out the bottom. Okay, so back on goes the, oh, look at that. Looks like a really, really tiny little worm right there. Another good sign. I think I read somewhere, somebody might have put it in the comments, that a European nightcrawler cocoon can only hatch just a couple baby worms, as opposed to, say, for example, an African nightcrawler cocoon, which can spawn off, I think, 8 or 10, I'm not even sure, babies. And then the other thing about the African versus the European nightcrawler is that the cycle time for the European nightcrawlers to reproduce is considerably longer. I think somebody noted that it was something like 70-80 days, as opposed to an African nightcrawler, which can reach maturity and breeding age in a fraction of that time. I don't remember what the numbers were. Somebody put it in the comments. So hopefully the European nightcrawlers catch up, but I got a feeling that the African nightcrawlers that we're going to feed next are a little bit on the advantage in terms of being able to reproduce and multiply and expand their numbers and eventually reach a large population size so they can really become effective. So this bin might just take a little bit longer to get to that stage. All right, let's move over to the VermiBag tote and feed the African nightcrawlers. Bye-bye, European nightcrawlers. So the one thing I'm noticing down here in the African nightcrawler VermiBag tote is a whole bunch of little tiny critters. I'm not sure if they're mites. The other thing I noticed when I open this container is flying insects. So normally I don't see a whole lot of that. Maybe it's because I'm boosting up the moisture levels that they're kind of starting to show up now. So we'll see where that leads. Same thing's going on in here, is that I've been attempting to oh no, I think I interrupted a mating session. There were two worms connected to one another, and I think they were attempting to fertilize each other in the mating process. So I feel bad that I barged in on them and interrupted a passionate moment. My only intention was to pick them up and show them to you and bring them a little bit closer to the camera, so I'm not sure if the camera caught what they were doing. Maybe it did. But maybe you'll notice the same thing is going on here. A lot more moisture than previously, if you've been following along. Because same thing here, I've been coming in here with the squirt bottle almost on a daily basis to apply a generous portion of water, especially around the outer edges where it's been getting fairly dry, and it seems to be doing a pretty good job. It's pretty quick to dry out though, because there is some stuff on the very edge that is not wet. It's actually quite dry, but you don't have to come in very far to get to material that's got some nice moisture content to it. So this is my first chance to really get a good close-up view of how my waterings have been working. I've just been coming in here spraying and closing up the container. I've not really probed around to see how the water's getting soaked in and affecting the material. But it does seem like things look pretty nice in here in terms of a moisture level, a nice comfortable moisture level for the worms. So I think that's working out quite nicely. Just like we saw in the European nightcrawler bin, there's also in here too, there's 2 pieces of corn. So we'll see if we can locate the other piece as well and set it aside. while we do our thing in here. It's not a very big bin. I'm surprised I can't find it. Here it is. I guess at some point soon, hopefully, they'll start working their way into that corn. And here too, I believe what we see here is a little tiny baby African nightcrawler, which is pretty cool. This is obviously a full-grown one, but this little guy right here on my index finger looks like a baby. I'm glad to see that we've got large and small worms occupying this bin at this point, that there's signs of reproduction. It's usually an indication that they're comfortable and content and happy to reproduce. These are nice sized worms, I gotta say. Composting with nightcrawlers is a bit new for me, so I'm still trying to get used to it in terms of the size of the worms that I see regularly. These are some signs of the previous feeding. The very moldy bread. Almost an entire banana peel. What is this? Another? Almost entire banana peel. So there's some pretty good sized chunks of their previous feeding remaining in here. But that doesn't matter. I'm going to feed anyway. Because the stuff that we're seeing now, stuff that's been sitting in here for a week, has got some nice breakdown started. But we got to give the next batch of food that they're going to be able to consume later on down the road a chance to also start breaking down. So just because I find food in the bin from the previous feeding doesn't really deter me. I'll always continue on with the plan and give them in the next batch of food, because then that gives that next batch of food a good chance to start getting sort of primed for the worms to be able to access it. You know, you throw some food in, they can't just go right for it. You need the bacteria and the fungus and everything to sort of take foothold first and start breaking the material down a bit. And when it starts to get all mushy and broken down as a result of the bacteria working on it initially, it's only after that point, I believe, that the worms can actually get to work on it. So, okay, I think I like what I'm seeing here. Let me rephrase that. I don't think I like what I'm seeing here. I definitely like what I'm seeing here. Things are looking pretty good. So we're just going to start grabbing some of these food items that we found while we were probing around and return them back down to the bottom here. We'll use those as sort of a platform to place the next batch of food onto. Same rationale as before. The new food is frozen, so this way the frozen food will just get piled on top of the old food and not on top of worms, which they might not appreciate. Alright, not bad. So I believe I could simply dump out what remains in my little basket here and give them everything that is left. It's only these two bins that we're going to be feeding today. I wanted to stagger my feedings a little bit more, because coming down here to feed all my red wiggler bins as well as all my nightcrawler bins and tend to everything, it's just beginning to be a bit much. So I figured if I just deal with the nightcrawlers on one day and then the red wigglers the next day, I can save myself the hassle of needing to deal with the entire population all at once to get them fed. Alrighty, looks like we got ourselves a nice batch of food in here for them to start working on. I believe the last feeding was also fairly generous. So even though we're you know, finding scraps of food from the previous feedings in here. I still think that they've done a nice job breaking down what they got previously, so I'm not complaining. Things look pretty good here. We're just going to wind down here like we did in the previous bin. Grit and coffee to cap things off. Alrighty. Cool. Let's see what we see as we start piling them back onto the center of the container. Oh, here's some more old food bits. Try to get them back down into the center of the feeding zone. Okay. This is pretty good out on this edge, actually. Usually I'd poke around on the very outer wall in these VermiBags and I find things to be quite dry. However, it seems like my water spraying regimen has been helping a lot because the material out here actually looks quite nice. Can't complain. Alright, so let's try to get things leveled off here for the most part so we can get things covered up here and let these little guys get back to work. Alright, so but before we cover up and put these guys back on the shelf, just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for keeping me company and watching my video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And by all means, if you did, then please always remember to give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate that. And also consider subscribing and ringing the bell at the same time so you get notifications from YouTube that I've got new material online. Alright everyone, that's it for today. Thanks again for keeping me company and for watching. And I guess we'll hopefully we'll catch you back here next time. Alright everyone, have a great day. Bye now.